Line graph. This is the next graph after bar graphs. Again, we're going to be describing different types of graphs that are located on the GED test. Again, these are just not for math. This will be also for social studies and science. Now, let me talk to you because we talked about what was special about graphs or bar graphs. Bar graphs are special because they show quantity. Um, and it could be any category of information. Line graphs are different. They're special in a different way. So they don't show quantity like a bar graph does. What makes a line graph special is that it shows change over time. Uh, Change over time. And another word that you might hear is continuous. So time is continuous. For instance, we just don't pause time. Time just doesn't pause like it does on a video. Time is a continuous thing. It just continues to change. It continues to increase. It's continually moving. You can't stop it. So line graph shows changes over time. So are things increasing or decreasing? How are things changing? So let's go ahead and take a look at some graphs and go ahead and describe and start to practice reading a graph. Okay, so first off, let's start with a basic graph. And you can see right here. Again, you can still do kind of like what you've done before. So in bar graph reading, I say, hey, there are three things you kind of want to do when you first look at a graph. The first thing you want to do is look at the title. Oh, let me write all that again. Sorry about all that. A little crazy there. So you want to look at the title, and as you can tell for the title, this is bear population in Emerald Forest. Okay. Second thing you want to take a look at is what are your variables that are being compared or described? You could say, well, on my horizontal, right? We included that word in the previous video. So on my horizontal axis, I'll see that years or time is being described. I'd say exactly. I'd say, what about that vertical axis? Remember over here, we talked again. If you did not watch my bar chart video, please watch them in order because again, I am introducing concepts in each one that will carry over to all the charts. And if I find that I have to keep repeating myself with vocabulary and keep describing it, it's going to take me longer and longer to get through these videos. So I don't want to do that, because there's 7 times a graph. I don't want to have to keep redefining the vocabulary. So please watch all these videos in order, and it will help you build that vocabulary for reading graphs and charts. So here we are, vertical axis. And I'd say, okay, what's on your vertical axis? You'd say, well, I see population. I'd say exactly. Okay, cool. So again, remember another word. Do you remember the other word? Independent and dependent variables. Do you remember that? In the previous video, I described that. And I said that again, on the horizontal axis, you will always have your independent variable. And on the vertical axis, you'll always have your dependent variable. All right. Third step. Okay, let's get back to our steps. Remember our quick 3 steps that we do before we start even trying to read the question and figure out what's going on. The first things that we do are we take a look at the title, we take a look at the variables, and the third thing that we want to do is we wanted to say, hey, what is high? What is low? Remember, we're just trying to get into just a quick description of what's happening with the data. So as we can see that on line charts, do you see here at the 2000 mark and then the 2001 mark? If you look at them, you'll see that there's distinctly a red circle. Do you see that? So that indicates the year 2000 is actually right there. And the actual year of 2001 is right here. Now, let's make some assumptions about that. So when we talk about 2000, we're talking about probably, let's say if I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say it's going to be January 1, of 2000, just like that mark there, or this indication here, is probably also January 1st, 2001. Okay, because again, remember it's this time, and you'd say, well, what does it mean that what about the in-between stuff? Well, remember, that's the rest of the year. The rest of the year is in there, right? January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and then December. And here we are, January 1st again. Boom, there's our first mark. So that's how this thing's being described. Again, let's go back to the high and low. Okay, lowest point. Well, it's the first one we've just described. It looks like if I look at low point, it would be 2000 at 40,000. So this is my low point. And I'd say, okay, good. What's my high point? You'd say, well, if I look at the continued points, try to find them, I'd say, well, okay, here's one way up here at the top. I'd say, okay, that year is 2006. I'd say, okay, and what quantity is it? And you have to look over there, right? You have to come over here and look. Say, oh, I see it. It's 140,000. So that would be my high point. My low point, 40,000 at 2000 on year 2000. And my high point, 140,000 at year 2006. Now, this one doesn't actually have a question. As you can tell, it's missing here, but whatever. What we would still want to do is describe the points. So again, first step, what is the title? This is Bear Population Animal Forest. Number two, what are the variables? You'd say time, years, and population. And then third, what is high and what's low? And we found the high point at 2006 and the low point at 2000 on year 2000. Now I finally see the question because I'm not really paying attention very much, trying to describe what I see for you guys. But here's the question right here. Here we go. What is the population in 2001? There's the question. And then here's my answers, and I can choose one over here. Okay, go ahead and pause the video and answer this question. All right. Did you come up with an answer? Okay, so again, remember they're asking specifically for 2001. So I want to make sure that I am looking at year 2001. And I look up and I find my little point, which is located right there. I'm going to look over to the left to come up with a number. Ahoy, look at this one. Do you notice that here, that spot is missing? Or it hasn't been labeled for us. Now, this is something that is very common when it comes to just graph reading. They don't have to label every single mark. There are some things that you're going to have to do to make some interpretations about what you see. So there is enough information here, actually, for you to figure out exactly where that spot is. So as you can tell, this spot is 40, this spot is 60. Hey, what number's between them? Hopefully you say 50. Good. See, there was enough information there so that I could figure out exactly what that number was. Now, this is something you're going to have to expect when it comes to graph reading. Okay, not every single thing on the graph will be labeled. What I mean by that is every single mark, every single hash mark. You will have your variables, they will be listed, but there are going to be some things that you're going to have to use that data to help you come up with other numbers. All right, let's take a look at another one. All right, here's another graph. And this is a good graph because it gives us an opportunity to discuss something else. Now, let's go ahead and answer the question before we do anything. Here's your question. Did the temperature increase or decrease between day 1 and 2? Go ahead and answer this question. Come up with it's either A or B, and then we'll pause the video and we'll continue. All right, did you come up with an answer? Okay, so again, what am I looking at? I don't really see a title. That's interesting, but I do see my variables where I see the date and the temperature. You notice the temperature is increasing from 0 all the way to 35. And that's normally what it does. Same thing with time, starts at 0, right? And moves as it moves to the right. All right, so if I look at that, I'd say, okay, day 1 and day 2. All right, day 1 located right here. And I'd look up and say, okay, I see you, Mark, you right there. And then I look over here to find a number and I say, oh, that is 15. So that mark is 15. Where is day 2? Located right here. I look up. I see that this point is being marked right there. And I look over to the left to see what it is and say, okay, that's 20. So did the temperature increase or decrease between day 1 and day 2? You'd say, oh, well, that definitely increased. I'd say, exactly. So my answer is increase. Now let's talk a little bit about this chart. Okay, I want to discuss a couple of ideas about this, some more vocabulary when it comes into graph reading, especially for line graphs. I want to talk about this highest point right here. This actually has a name. In line graph reading, we would actually call that point right there a peak, like a mountain peak. It's going to be the highest point. Okay, so we would call that a peak. Another thing that you would talk about is trend. Now, this is very common for line graphs because it shows change over time. So this word trend is a question that you're going to see maybe once or twice. Maybe you might see it a couple of times if you're talking about line graphs. Trend means where are we going? Or where is the data going? And what they mean by that is, am I showing an overall increase in data points, or am I showing an overall decrease in data points? Is my trend in time, is it increasing, or is my trend in time decreasing? So when we look at this one can be a little trickier for students. And when I talk about trend, they'll say quickly, sometimes students will look at this whole chart and they say, hey, take a look at this chart. I'd say, what is the overall trend? And then students, most of the time, what they do is they go over here to the last part of the chart and they say, okay, which direction is it going? Is it going up? Is it going down? They'd say, oh, Varun, it's going down. This is decreasing, Varun. I'd say, no, 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 you did it incorrect. Because trend doesn't just mean where is the last data point in reference to the data point before that. It doesn't look at that. When you look at trend means basically, or not even basically, it means overall. So when you look at trend, you want to look at every data point along the way. So when we look at that, we're going to actually look at every single data point and we're going to decide, hey, did this increase or did this decrease prior or in accordance to the one prior to it? So for instance, here, this is my start. So I don't know if it's increasing or decreasing, right? You can't even say whether it's increasing or decreasing because there's nothing to compare it with, right? Like we have no other spot down here. We don't know. So that's my starting spot. And I'd say, okay. So if this is my starting spot, I'd say, okay, from here to here, did it go up or down? And students say, well, that's an increase. I'd say, exactly. Okay, so it went up, right? I'd say, okay, from here to here, did it increase or decrease? You'd say, well, it looks like it's still moving in an upward direction. So that's an increase. I'd say, exactly. What about from here to here? Okay, that's another increase. So I'd say, okay. So now I can tell, I can say, well, that's reached my peak, right? Because from here to here, it's actually going down. This is a decrease. And from here to here, I'm looking at another decrease. Okay, so here when we talk about overall trend, and this is the actual key word, overall, by looking at the whole graph, which means I have to compare or analyze the whole thing. You don't want to just compare the last the two data points. You don't look at just the first data points. You have to look at the whole thing. So by looking at the whole thing, we can say, well, it looks like I had 3 increases. And then over here are showing 2 decreases. I'd say yeah, that's correct. I'd say, so what's going on then with your data? You'd say, well, it looks like I have more increase than decrease. I'd say exactly, because if I look at the whole thing, I'd say it's increasing more than it's decreasing. Exactly. So I'd say overall trend is increasing. So you might have a question like this, and this is how you answer that type of question. Let's go ahead and take a look at another one and see what you think. Okay, here's exactly that question. So here's a new chart. Okay, it's my weight. The variables are being described as the number of months, which is the independent variable, and the weight, which is the dependent variable. Overall, my lows and highs, here's my low, here's my high. So again, that's my basic analysis. That's kind of just basically looking at the graph and just saying, okay, this is what I see, high, lows, what I'm looking at. Okay, good. Now, the question says, what is the overall trend? Now, again, remember the word overall is the key word here. You want to look at the whole graph. And by looking at the whole graph, that means you're going to look at every single data point that's been marked along the way. So if this is my start point at July, and say, okay, from July to August, what happened? You'd say, well, it went up. So that's an increase. I'd say exactly. What about from August to September? You'd say, well, nothing happened. I'd say, okay, so that's no change. Another word people will use is the word stagnant. Hope I spelled that right. But stagnant just means no change. Okay. Then I'd say, okay, what about between September and October? And say, oh, well, it's between September and it went up again. So that's another increase. Exactly. What about from October to November? You'd say, oh, it went up again, Darren. All right. So already, let's count those increases because as you can tell, we've already reached a peak, right? Because we can kind of tell that it's going to move down. That's my high point. It's going to move down after that. So already I see 3 increases. That's a lot. Okay. Now I look at from November to December. I'd say, well, there's my first decrease, right? It's moving downward. So that's my first decrease. So I have 1 decrease, right? Versus 3 increases. So I'd say, okay, 3 increases versus 1 decrease. What is the overall trend? So hopefully you would say, well, the overall trend is increasing. I'd say exactly.